It begins with the sound of boots scraping against concrete, a faint echo rising from beneath the soil of Eastern Europe. In 2019, a team of Russian hydrologists lowered their lights into the poisoned waters of Lake Karachay, expecting radiation readings, not a sealed iron door. When they broke through, they uncovered a bunker untouched since the height of the Cold War. Inside lay steel containers marked with both Soviet and NATO codes, proof of a forgotten collaboration hidden beneath decades of silence. This story begins there, with what was buried and the men who made sure no one ever found it. Chapter 1: The Bunker Beneath Lake Karachay. In the final years of the Second World War, as Europe smoldered and nations redefined themselves in the ashes, another kind of war was already taking shape. One fought not with bullets, but with knowledge. Laboratories replaced trenches. Scientists became soldiers in white coats. The Soviet Union, wounded yet victorious, sought to build an empire not just of ideology, but of biology and physics, of power that could outlast any bomb. To the west, the United States raced to absorb the remnants of German science through Operation Paperclip. To the east, the Soviets conducted their own quiet harvest. Engineers, physicians, and chemists pulled from the ruins of Berlin, Dresden, and Prague. They were promised sanctuary and secrecy. Many disappeared into research cities like Artemis 16 or Chelyabinsk 70, names that, for decades, never appeared on any map. Chelyabinsk lay deep within the Ural Mountains, a land of frozen rivers and shadowed forests. It was here, in 1948, that Stalin's government began building a series of closed cities designed to support nuclear research and weapons production. Behind the fences, reactors hummed day and night. Plutonium was born in secret. Waste was buried, burned, or dumped into nearby lakes. One of them was called Karachay, a small, deep basin that would become one of the most contaminated places on Earth. Life around it was simple, even beautiful, for those who didn't know. Birch trees leaned over the still water. Villagers fished in nearby streams, unaware that invisible particles drifted downstream into their crops, their homes, their lungs. By the mid-1950s, entire communities vanished from official records, relocated without explanation. Maps were redrawn. Karachay was quietly erased. Inside the nearby Mayak facility, researchers worked under a shroud of classified directives. They developed purification systems, cooling mechanisms, and containment procedures. Yet their true focus wasn't nuclear energy. Buried within Department 742 was a program known only as Project Glasshouse. Officially, it was a biological decontamination study. Unofficially, it was something far more dangerous, an attempt to weaponize microorganisms capable of surviving radiation. The concept was chilling. Imagine pathogens that could endure fallout, carried by the wind after a nuclear exchange, infecting survivors while leaving infrastructure intact. For decades, the documents describing this research were sealed in vaults marked State Security Priority. The scientists were forbidden from speaking, even to their families. When one technician attempted to defect in 1962, he vanished en route to the Finnish border. His body was never found. Yet beneath the secrecy, the human cost grew. Accidents were common. Workers fell ill without diagnosis. Entire shifts were replaced under routine health reassignment. And when the Kishtim disaster struck in 1957, a nuclear waste explosion that contaminated thousands of square kilometers, Karachay became the perfect dumping ground. Containment became burial. Burial became forgetting. By the time the Cold War reached its most paranoid years, Lake Karachay had swallowed more than waste. It had consumed records, equipment, and entire structures sealed under layers of concrete. Facility 742 disappeared from all registries by 1972, its existence purged by order of the Ministry of Medium Machine Building, the Soviet agency overseeing nuclear and biological weapons. For decades, no one spoke its name again, and so, while the world watched the moon landings, the missile treaties, and the fall of the Berlin Wall, this small, toxic lake in the Urals guarded its secret in silence. Radiation kept intruders away. Maps kept it invisible. History simply looked elsewhere, until the summer of 2019, when the water levels began to drop. Climate change had reached even the most forbidden places, and beneath the shrinking shoreline, metallic outlines appeared, too symmetrical to be natural. When divers descended, their instruments screamed with gamma readings beyond the safe limit. But curiosity, or perhaps duty, pushed them forward. Beneath the layers of silt and rusted piping, a reinforced hatch emerged, bolted shut and stamped with a faded insignia. 742. State property. Do not enter. They entered anyway. The air inside was dry, almost preserved. Dust floated through beams of flashlight like snow in the dark. Corridors led to sealed storage rooms, labeled in a mixture of Cyrillic and English, a detail that raised immediate suspicion. In one chamber, they found lead-lined boxes bearing both Soviet serial numbers and Western manufacturer codes. What was an American biocontainment container doing in a Soviet bunker that officially never existed? When radiation teams arrived days later, they recovered dozens of sealed vials stored in suspended racks, still intact. Some contained nothing more than sterilized water. Others were labeled with the initials GH-59, declassified. CIA records would later reveal that same label, GH, as shorthand for glasshouse, first, intercepted in an encrypted KGB communication dated 1959. The implications were staggering. If true, it meant that during the Cold War, Soviet and Western scientists may have secretly collaborated, sharing biological data in violation of every known treaty. The evidence was buried, literally, beneath one of the world's most toxic lakes. But in 2019, for the first time in 70 years, Facility 742 was no longer silent. The metal had rusted, the ice had melted, and history, once again, was ready to speak. Chapter 2. Operation Harpstring, the Berlin Tunnels, Berlin, 1954. The city was still divided by rubble, its scars fresh from a war that had ended less than a decade before. Smoke no longer rose, but the air was heavy with something just as suffocating: suspicion. Every conversation carried an echo, every knock on the door, a pause before answering. East and West stood shoulder to shoulder, yet every handshake hid a question. Who are you working for? The Allies had turned Berlin into a laboratory of espionage. Each sector, American, British, French, Soviet, was a maze of surveillance and counterintelligence. The rubble had become camouflage. Abandoned cellars served as listening posts, basements as drop sites. In this divided world, information was more powerful than any weapon. That's when Operation Harpstring was born. The idea was simple in theory, almost poetic in its ambition: to build a tunnel beneath Soviet-controlled East Berlin and tap into their military communication lines. It was the brainchild of the CIA's Berlin operations base, with the help of British intelligence, MI6. Together, they believed they could hear the heartbeat of the Red Army, one whispered command at a time. Planning began in secret rooms at Tempelhof, under the codename Project Regal. American engineers studied Berlin's sewers and utility lines. British agents supplied maps from captured Nazi archives showing the city's pre-war tunnels. Over the course of 2 years, equipment was smuggled into the city disguised as agricultural machinery. Locals were hired under false contracts. They thought they were helping lay new power lines. In reality, they were building one of the most ambitious espionage projects of the entire Cold War. It began under a small warehouse in the Neukölln district. Night after night, men worked by red light, digging silently beneath the clay and brick. The tunnel extended nearly half a mile into Soviet territory, a dark artery beneath the divided city. Engineers reinforced every meter with steel ribs. The air smelled of sweat, diesel, and fear. No one spoke above a whisper. They all knew what would happen if the Soviets found them. By 1955, the wiretap chamber was operational. Operators monitored Soviet army cables 24 hours a day. They recorded conversations between bases, troop movements, even fragments of coded reports. Everything was sent west for translation and analysis. In total, the tunnel collected more than 500,000 calls. But what the men inside didn't know, what history would not uncover for decades, was that the KGB already knew it existed. In 1951, long before the tunnel was even dug, a British intelligence officer named George Blake had been recruited by the Soviets. As a member of MI6, Blake had full access to joint operations, including Harpstring. He revealed everything, plans, locations, timetables, directly to Moscow. But instead of exposing the tunnel, the Soviets made a decision that stunned historians later. They let it continue. For nearly a year, Soviet commanders fed controlled information through those very lines, using the tunnel as a stage for deception. They leaked troop numbers, weapon counts, and training schedules, all plausible, all false. The West thought they were listening in on secret war plans. In truth, they were hearing a carefully orchestrated performance. Still, to the men stationed in the tunnel, it felt like victory. "We believed we were making history," one operator later recalled. "Every transmission was a heartbeat of the enemy. We thought we were winning the invisible war." Then, in April 1956, everything changed. A sudden power outage cut all lines to the tunnel. Within hours, Soviet soldiers swarmed the entrance. They filmed the discovery, paraded the equipment, and denounced the West for aggressive espionage. The propaganda was immediate and effective. Harpstring became an international scandal. The US denied involvement. Britain issued no comment. Inside intelligence circles, blame and silence intertwined. The operation was officially closed. But the data it had gathered remained buried in classified archives. For decades, Harpstring was remembered as both a triumph of engineering and a failure of secrecy. The tunnel itself was sealed, flooded, and forgotten beneath Berlin's reconstruction. But time, like the soil above it, has a way of shifting. In 2022, during a routine subway expansion beneath Neukölln, workers struck something metallic. It wasn't a pipe, it was reinforced steel. When the wall was breached, they found themselves staring into a chamber lined with aged equipment and cables still snaking into the earth. The markings were unmistakable. Regal 54, property of Allied forces. Archaeologists, engineers, and historians were brought in. What they uncovered inside changed everything. The tunnel had been sealed from both sides, east and west. But in the main control room, a small crate sat untouched, wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were film reels, logbooks, and a single British cipher pad. Yet what drew the most attention were several listening devices aimed not toward the east, but toward the west. That discovery ignited a new wave of questions. Was Harpstring really about spying on the Soviets? Or had parts of the operation been redirected to monitor Allied communications? The British National Archives declassified a small set of documents in 2023 confirming internal audit. Transmissions are sanitized. Phrase suggesting self-surveillance within NATO. Networks, one memo, dated December 1955, carried a single line. Verification protocols require two-way monitoring. Beneath it, a name, G. Blake. For modern investigators, it raised an uncomfortable possibility that the tunnel wasn't just a tool of espionage, but a mirror reflecting the paranoia of both sides. No one was trusted, not even one's allies. Today, the rediscovered tunnels lie under secure preservation. Their damp walls bear the marks of drills and shovels, the ghost prints of hands that worked in silence 70 years ago. Standing inside, one can still hear the slow drip of water echoing through the darkness. A reminder of a time when truth was buried as deep as the lies built to conceal it. Operation Harpstring was supposed to expose an enemy. Instead, it revealed how fragile trust becomes when every voice is suspect and every silence might be listening back. Chapter 3. The Ghost Files of Unit 108, Northern Honshu, Japan. Late autumn, the wind carries the scent of cedar and salt from the nearby coast. A storm, the worst in decades, had just torn through the region, washing away hillsides and exposing scars the land had long kept hidden. Among them, a tunnel mouth carved by hand, its entrance sealed with rusted steel and the red dust of decades. The team who found it were archaeologists, not soldiers. They came searching for remnants of wartime bunkers, but what they uncovered was something different, a site that should not have existed. The markings above the entrance were faint, almost erased by time, but the characters were still legible. Lujun di Bai Babu Doi, Army Unit 108. Officially, there was no Unit 108. Japan's imperial records list no such division, no such number, but inside that tunnel, time and secrecy had preserved a darker truth. The first chamber was small, lined with decaying wooden shelves. Glass jars lay shattered on the floor. Others remained sealed, cloudy, their contents floating in yellowed liquid. Nearby, a rusted film projector sat half buried under debris. When investigators finally powered it, what appeared on the wall silenced the entire room. Laboratory footage, dated 1944. Men in surgical gowns. Prisoners restrained on metal tables. A title card reading simply, Cold Harvest, Phase 3. The name meant nothing at first. But a year later, When declassified US Army documents surfaced through the Freedom of Information Act, one file referenced Project Cold Harvest, a continuation of research conducted under Japan's Wartime Biological Division. Those files bore both American and Japanese signatures. The revelation shocked historians. Unit 108, it seemed, had not been destroyed at the end of the war. It had been absorbed. The Imperial Japanese Army had run multiple biological and chemical divisions during World War II, the most infamous being Unit 731 in Manchuria, but lesser-known branches, like Unit 108, were believed to operate domestically, testing the survivability of pathogens in Japan's own climate. Records show field studies in forests, mountain villages, and coastal areas. None of the sites were ever acknowledged after 1945. When Japan surrendered, Allied intelligence prioritized capturing scientific data over prosecuting war crimes. In return for information, many Unit 731 researchers were granted immunity, but the documents recovered in Honshu suggest another deal, one hidden within Cold War secrecy. Cold Harvest, according to the American memos, was initiated at Fort Detrick, Maryland, between 1949 and 1953. Several foreign specialists were listed as consultants. Their names were redacted, but handwritten notes in the margins referred to Tokyo Group, former 108. If true, it meant that US biological research had quietly relied on the work of Japan's wartime scientists, effectively preserving the same programs they had vowed to condemn. Inside the Honshu tunnels, the team uncovered refrigerated cabinets filled with index cards. Each listed sample types, test environments, and subject responses. Some bore chilling annotations: exposure successful, lethal within 72 hours, transferred to Detrick. Among the papers was a carbon copy of a letter, unsigned but stamped with an imperial seal. It read, "The Emperor's silence does not absolve us. Continue in secrecy. History will not remember what it cannot find." The deeper the team went, the more the air thickened, not just with decay, but with the sense that the world above had never been meant to know this place existed. The final chamber contained a single wooden crate wrapped in tarred canvas. Inside were canisters labeled Specimen GH59. The same label had appeared earlier in the recovered Soviet materials from Lake Karachay. 2 programs, 2 nations, 1 code name. How could Japan's secret biological division and a Soviet Cold War lab share the same designation? A plausible answer lies in 1950s geopolitics. The Korean War had redrawn the map of alliances and opportunity. Both sides sought any advantage in biological and chemical warfare. Documents show that, during this period, data exchanges through neutral countries like Switzerland and Sweden became increasingly common. Some Japanese scientists, working under American custody, were relocated to international health institutes, civilian programs that may have served as conduits for information. And in 1959, just as the glasshouse research in the Soviet Union reached its peak, intercepted communications mentioned a shipment of archival biological material transferred through an intermediary in Tokyo. No one ever confirmed its destination. By 2021, when news of the Honshu discovery broke, Japan's government responded swiftly. The tunnel was sealed, access restricted. Within weeks, all samples and documents were confiscated by the Ministry of Defense. No official statement was issued, only a brief release citing public safety concerns. But whistleblowers within the investigation claimed something extraordinary: that DNA analysis on the preserved samples showed a mixture of bacterial, strains not seen since the 1940s, genetically altered beyond their natural form. Some of the modifications matched theoretical studies from Fort Detrick's Cold Harvest files. Others, disturbingly, resembled Soviet biological data from Facility 742, different continents, different regimes, yet the same fingerprints of collaboration. For those who studied Cold War history, the implications cut deep. The ideological divide between East and West had defined half a century of global politics. But behind laboratory doors, perhaps that divide blurred. Survival, secrecy, and scientific ambition may have united enemies in silence. When the last of the Honshu materials were airlifted away under military escort, local villagers watched from a distance. To them, it was just another excavation. But for historians, it was the resurfacing of a buried truth. a reminder that even the most tightly sealed vaults eventually breathe. The storm that uncovered the tunnel had been an accident of weather. The discoveries that followed were not accidents at all. They were consequences of men who believed knowledge was worth any price, and governments that believed forgetting was safer than facing what that knowledge had created. The ghosts of Unit 108 do not rest easily. Their story lingers in classified archives, in debriefings still redacted, in laboratories that inherited their silence. And as the world confronts new fears of biological warfare and lab-borne contagion, those old experiments whisper a warning from beneath the soil of northern Japan. History buried in the name of security will always, eventually, return to the surface. Chapter 4. Red Mercury and the Prague Caches. Prague, 2021. Beneath the cobblestone courtyards and quiet monasteries, a forgotten world stirred. It began, as these things often do, by accident. A single urban explorer, a rusted gate, and a tunnel that should have led nowhere. But beneath the old Strahov monastery, the air grew colder, metallic. The explorer's light caught a warning painted decades ago in a fading red hand. "Не отвирай." Do not open. What he found would draw the eyes of every intelligence service in Europe. Inside the chamber were lead drums, each marked with radiation warnings and a date, 1959. No inventory number, no institutional seal. Just the symbol of the Warsaw Pact, crudely stenciled over a faded Czechoslovak crest. The containers were wedged in concrete alcoves like tombs, wrapped in sheets of lead foil. When specialists arrived days later, Geiger counters crackled. Radiation, faint but real. And something else, a crystalline residue inside the drums that defied identification. The label, handwritten in Cyrillic, read simply RM, Red Mercury. For decades, Red Mercury had existed on the edge of myth. A rumored Cold War supermaterial said to enable compact nuclear devices, a catalyst for pure destruction. Officially, no such substance existed. Yet in Prague, there it was, sealed, catalogued, and hidden beneath a monastery known for housing the nation's oldest theological library. A place no one would think to search. The investigation that followed was swift but silent. Czech security forces evacuated the area, citing archival instability. Within days, NATO chemical units arrived. Every piece of evidence was logged, sealed, and transported to a restricted laboratory in Belgium. But not before a team of historians photographed the chamber's wall inscriptions, lists of dates, coded initials, and what appeared to be shipment routes across Eastern Europe. One phrase repeated in each entry, Operation Vector, declassified documents from the former Czechoslovak State Security, STB, would later confirm the name. Operation Vector began in 1958 as a joint project between Prague and Moscow, ostensibly to develop new explosives for mining and industry. But the files hinted at something darker. Among the official materials requisitioned for the project were uranium byproducts, mercury compounds, and non-standard catalysts of military interest. The quantities were small, far too small for an industrial program. The location chosen for storage, Strahov Monastery, where renovations offered a convenient cover for underground access. But the real revelation came from an unexpected source, the Vatican Archives. In 2022, a historian uncovered correspondence between a Czech cardinal and the Holy See, dated 1960, referencing scientific contraband hidden under clerical protection. "Our brothers have safeguarded the crates," the letter read, "but we no longer trust what they contain. The Soviet couriers come at night. They promise redemption, but they bring only danger." The priests of Strahov had not been collaborators. They had been unwilling custodians. As modern analysts examined the remaining residue, they found no trace of any nuclear compound. The substance inside the drums was chemically unique, a dense amalgam of mercury oxide and red dye used in Soviet detonators. In other words, not a nuclear catalyst, but a decoy, a cover story. Red Mercury, as it turned out, may have been the perfect disinformation campaign, a weapon of rumor, designed to lure foreign buyers and fund covert research through black market sales. But then came a second finding. Embedded within the concrete near the drums were faint isotopic signatures of plutonium, genuine trace amounts, enough to prove that the monastery had once held more than fake material. Something real had passed through those walls, and somewhere between 1959 and 1961, it had been moved. Newly opened Soviet-era ledgers revealed a line item for precious scientific cargo. Praga to Rostov, Operation Vector 5. Rostov, at the time, was the transit point for shipments heading toward the Mayak nuclear complex, the same region tied to facility. 742 beneath Lake Karachay. Threads that had once seemed separate now began to weave together. Intelligence historians believe Operation Vector was not about producing red mercury at all. It was about moving nuclear material under the cover of a mythical compound. The West's obsession with finding red mercury had been exploited by the East to conceal genuine weapons-grade transfers. Every rumor, every black market sale, every whispered lead about red mercury had served its purpose: distraction. Yet, not all of the Vector shipments reached their destinations. The Prague cache was one of several waypoints designed as fallback depots. According to Soviet communications decrypted decades later, one of those shipments, marked RM6, vanished en route to Rostov in 1960. No record of recovery has ever surfaced. In the decades that followed, the legend of red mercury spread through intelligence circles and arms dealers alike. Some believed it was a hoax. Others swore they had seen it glow faintly under ultraviolet light. For some, it became a metaphor for Cold War paranoia, the pursuit of power that never truly existed. But in Prague, the dust tells a quieter story. Radiation still lingers in the tunnels. The monastery walls bear new seals, fresh concrete poured over old sins. The lead drums were removed, but the indentations where they once rested remain, 6 circles perfectly aligned, like the petals of a metallic flower. One historian who examined the site remarked softly, "This wasn't storage, it was sanctuary." The monks had guarded not a weapon, but a warning, proof of how far nations would go to deceive, and how easily faith and fear could intertwine in the service of secrecy. Today, Strahof's library is open again. Tourists stroll its marble halls, photographing illuminated manuscripts and frescoed ceilings. Few realize that just meters beneath their feet lies a corridor where East and West conspired in the same shadows, where red mercury shimmered in the light of myth, and where truth, radioactive, unstable, was buried to protect the illusion of peace. Chapter 5. The Arctic Listening Station. The Arctic has always been a place of silence, vast, cold, eternal. But beneath that silence, another kind once thrived. The hum of machines, the faint static of intercepted voices carried on the frozen air. In 2023, satellite imagery revealed something unnatural beneath the permafrost near Svalbard. A perfect grid of metallic shapes, symmetrical and deliberate. What emerged after months of excavation would unearth one of the last great secrets of the Cold War: NATO's hidden listening post, Station WWII. At first glance, the site appeared like any abandoned research outpost: steel panels, communication towers, empty corridors sealed in ice. But when the Norwegian and US teams broke through the main control vault, they found everything intact. Equipment, records, even ration packs still stamped with the year 1974. The air inside was sterile, preserved by the cold. And at the center of it all, a room marked Relay 0. Inside that room were reels of magnetic tape, dozens of them, labeled Property of the US Navy, Do Not Transmit. When restored, the tapes emitted not the sounds of Soviet submarines, as expected, but something far stranger: distorted transmissions of American naval call signs. The signatures matched vessels that had never been listed as active in Arctic waters. Cross-referencing the data, naval historians found an impossible detail. One of the ships had been decommissioned 5 years before the recording was made. The official purpose of WWII was to track Soviet nuclear submarines crossing under the ice cap. Built in 1962, at the height of Cold War paranoia, the station was part of a broader initiative known as Operation Silent Net, a chain of hydroacoustic arrays stretching from Greenland to Norway. It was meant to listen outward, toward the east. But the tape suggested that at some point, WWII turned inward, listening to its own. Throughout the 1960s, NATO's Northern Command faced a growing fear: infiltration not from outside, but within. The defection of British intelligence officer Kim Philby and revelations of Soviet moles had shaken the alliance to its core. WWII, it seems, became more than a listening post. It became a verification node, recording Allied transmissions to detect leaks and unauthorized operations. In effect, a spy station built to spy on its own network. Declassified communications now confirm that by 1968, WWII was part of a secret initiative known as Project Isopod, a system of signal verification outposts designed to ensure message integrity during potential first strike scenarios. On paper, it was a safety measure. In practice, it was a paranoia machine, feeding mistrust across every channel it touched. The base logs reveal an unsettling pattern. In February 1972, operators reported receiving duplicate transmissions, identical messages broadcast simultaneously from two NATO sources thousands of kilometers apart. At first, they believed it was Soviet interference, but later analysis proved the signals originated within Allied channels. Then came the disappearances. Between March and May, 3 technicians stationed at WWII vanished without record. Their names were removed from payroll rosters. No investigation followed. The last log entry before the facility was sealed reads simply, "System compromised. Order to terminate relay. Do not archive." And yet, someone did archive it. When modern investigators unearthed the tapes, they also found fragments of personal effects. A worn photograph of a crew standing beside a radar mast. A diary frozen in a metal locker, its pages brittle but legible. The final entry was dated October 1974. They told us we're not supposed to listen anymore. But the lines never stop. Something keeps broadcasting. After that, silence. The station was abandoned. Officially, WWII was decommissioned due to structural instability from shifting ice. In truth, the coordinates were struck from NATO's registry, and the entire existence of the project was buried beneath classified layers marked Communication Integrity Assurance. For 50 years, the Arctic reclaimed it. The snow, the frost, the weight of time pressing down until only memory remained. But when the thaw began, the ghosts spoke again. The hydroacoustic sensors, still powered by dormant batteries, had recorded something in their final days. A low-frequency pulse repeating every 9 seconds. Analysts at first dismissed it as glacial movement, but older technicians recognized it. It was the signature pattern used by NATO to synchronize encrypted transmissions. The network had gone offline half a century ago. Yet somehow, one signal had continued to transmit. Whether it was an automated loop or something else, no one could confirm. The equipment was too degraded. But the fact remained, a forgotten Cold War station, buried under ice, was still whispering into the void. For those who stood within the ruins of WWII, it was an eerie feeling, as though the Cold War itself had never truly ended, only gone silent. The Arctic wind roared through the empty corridors, carrying echoes of a time when mistrust justified every secret, when silence was the only safe language. The discovery of WWII forced governments to confront an uncomfortable truth, that the era of surveillance did not fade with the fall of the Berlin Wall. It evolved. The systems that once listened for submarines now listen for everything, from encrypted communications to digital footprints. The technology changed. The intention did not. Historians call WWII the Echo Station, a relic of a century that mistrusted itself so deeply, it needed machines to confirm what men could no longer believe. Its story is not one of heroes or villains, but of a world suspended between fear and survival. Today, the snow covers it once again. The steel has begun to rust. The wind sweeps through the broken antenna arrays, producing a soft, hollow hum, like breath beneath the ice. If you stand there long enough, it almost sounds like a voice carried across time, faint, fractured, but unmistakably human. And perhaps that is the final message of WWII, that every empire, every secret, every listening post built in silence eventually speaks, not through words, but through the echoes it leaves behind.